You're now watching Sports Bettor's Paradise on the Bet Rivers Network.
All right, Jimmy, Ott and Paul Stone talking college football. We do it twice a week. First of the week, we look at the high profile, the high volume games that everybody's going to be watching. And if you're watching it, you want a little action on this. So we give you opinions on those and some picks, leans, opinions, the whole analysis. And then we give our best bets. That's what we're doing today. And let's get right to it. And, Paul, I'll start off with one that I like. And, boy, the zigzag theory, huh? Notre Dame. Pretty good. We don't know how good A&M is. You know, we don't know. But I got to believe they're as good as Purdue. Just a hunch, but I think they're as good as Purdue. Notre Dame went into A&M, looked great. They were told how great they were. There was easy path to the playoff, and then they lose, and it was no fluke. Not only did Northern Illinois go in there and beat them, that line opened up 30, went down to 28. But they lost their best offensive player before the last drive, and they still drove it down close enough to kick the game-winning field goal, and they win it 16-14. Riley Leonard is struggling passing a little bit. He's more comfortable with his legs at this point, but still, I've got to believe that there's no banquet tour this weekend. If Notre Dame, if they cannot get their team ready to play, if they're ever going to be excited about playing Purdue, it is this week. I rarely take the Irish because it's a public team. They're always inflated a couple of points or so. But this week, man, if had they won routinely, I wouldn't touch it. If anything, I might take Purdue. But in this spot, after that loss to Northern Illinois, they've been getting dog cussed pretty good. Irish going to come back with a little bit of that edge and harass that Texas transfer Hudson Card, maybe into some turnovers there. Irish minus 10 at West Lafayette against Purdue, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, you have to expect Notre Dame. I think it would be difficult to, almost maybe not impossible, but to leave an 11-1 Notre Dame team out of the playoff, regardless of how easy their schedule might shape up compared to some others. So they still have something to play for. They still have something on the table. And as you indicated, I think good football teams are going to play their best after straight-up defeats. That's one of the things I look for, as long as they still have something to play for and their goals aren't off the table. I often look at that angle. You want to, you want to buy low and sell high, so to speak. And I think this is a grand time to be taking Notre Dame. You have to expect a big-time effort. They're cornered. They're up against the wall, and they need to come out swinging. So I certainly can't fault you taking the Irish there.
I will tell you this. You and our little side bet for a beer, I think I might as well just buy you one, because if it gets to 10-2, this is about as damaging of a loss as they could have if they do go to 10-2. There's so many games to be played, and it depends a lot on what other teams do. But I just thought, being Notre Dame, 10-2, they would get the benefit of the doubt. I mean, it's just the way history tells us that. But, man, is there a worse loss that they could have had than at home as a 28, 30-point favorite? So, to your point, let me just order your beer next time we see you, huh? You got me a lemonade at the Cabana last time. Oh, yeah, a cold one. All right, let's get to one of your picks, Paul. And we've been looking at this team for a long time in the offseason and kind of peeking at those numbers, because the group of five is getting one in. So it looks, Memphis, Boise State, Liberty had gotten some mention, even Texas State, and maybe some Tulane. Boy, if they could have pulled off the Kansas State win, may have been a little bit interesting. But this is the one game that they're going to be underdog. It looked a lot tougher in the summer than it does now with Florida State 0-2. At least Florida State, unlike Notre Dame last year after that Dublin trip, they made sure they had to bye, kind of get their legs back after going 0-2, but they've got some issues there. Noles still 6.5, 52.5 in Tallahassee against Memphis.
Yeah, Jimmy, I tell you, Florida State is already paying Memphis $1.3 million to come to Tallahassee on Saturday and play this game. And man, would it not add insult to injury if they came into Doak Campbell Stadium and left with a victory and a hefty paycheck there. So just a little side note, I think part of handicapping, and I imagine you would agree to an extent, I think part of handicapping is being an amateur psychologist from afar. We're not, unless we're covering the beat and we're there every day in the locker room or at practice, which you don't get to watch practice much anymore. But we're not intimately involved with the day-to-day operations of a program necessarily, but we can still, assess and offer our quote-unquote professional opinion. And that's what I've done here. That's what a lot of this handicap's about. First of all, I look at an 0-2 Florida State team that began the season in the preseason top 10 and then proceeded to lose its first 2 games, both as a double-digit betting favorite. So the Seminoles' playoff chances pretty much essentially up in flames by the end of the day on Labor Day. That's pretty early. I don't think that's what they had in mind. In fact, you look at this Florida State football program, and I don't see a whole lot that's gone right since standout quarterback Jordan Travis was hurt in their 10th game of the season last year against FCS North Alabama. Lost for the season. They win their last 2 games, but in very unimpressive fashion, don't get in the playoff, and it just seems like it's kind of been on a downspin ever since. Memphis, on the other hand, this is a team, as you mentioned, firmly in the group of 5 conversation for that spot in the 12-team playoff. And even though Florida State is 0-2, a victory on the road over a brand program like Florida State would obviously be huge for Memphis's chances. I just look at where these teams are mentally, and I just have to believe that Memphis's, what I like to call collective team psyche, is in a better spot than Florida State's. I've got to believe Memphis is paying attention to detail this week. They're excited to be playing Florida State. Some of them probably wanted to go to Florida State and probably didn't get offered, didn't get an NIL deal. So here they are at Memphis, and they have something to prove. They're already playing with a chip on their shoulder, and now they've got some stakes to play for as well in that 12-team playoff. So I just like where they are, better than Florida State. Plus, I like the quarterback matchup. I like Seth Hennigan, the veteran quarterback from Memphis. To me, he's a more quality quarterback on typically day in and day out than Florida State's DJ Uyangale, who can be a little bit erratic. So you add it all up, and I'll take Memphis plus 6.5 over Florida State.
Paul Stone, you're very kind. A little bit erratic. Yes, I'd say so. I'd say that's being very nice about it. So, and the other thing is Florida State a little bit like that Michigan State team the following year, where they had so many transfer portal starters. Now they don't have 17 like they started the 2023 season that started. It's more like 8 this year. But man, it was a big drop off the following year. Now Florida State's a stronger program than Michigan State. I get that, but it reminds me of that season where they were so heavily. The roster was the starters were so full of transfer portal guys that were there for 1 year for the most part and then gone. Speaking of psychology, the haves and the have-nots, as far as their resources, their budgets, has only widened. It's never been wider. But you know what? The lack of respect for your opponent from the haves toward the have-nots may not be wider either. I mean, we saw some real big favorites, big resource programs go down to teams or lose FCS teams, the whole bit. So getting the respect for your team, like, wait a minute, these guys never offered me a penny. I'm getting paid this and that. Well, they can't have any players, huh? Well, so is the case because of psychology. I mean, these teams these low budget teams are definitely getting up to play. These higher resource, higher budget teams. So I'll bring you to the Civil War in Corvallis, Oregon. So Oregon's going to the Big Ten, Oregon State, the Pac-2. I mean, that is rough. But listen, but Oregon has been less than impressive. 24-14 against Idaho. They get out first down. They get outgained by Boise State at home. Boise State's good, but I watched Georgia Southern go up and down the field on them. They had them at home, and Boise State gave up. Georgia Southern gained more yardage than Oregon did against Boise State. So in a 37-34 game where they were fortunate to hang on. So they're going to Oregon State, where Oregon State, this is a massive circle game. They look pretty good. San Diego State's not that good, but I mean, they took care of business easily. Both Oregon State and Washington State both playing Big Brother. But the one difference why it's one of my best bets is this one's at home. A rivalry game at home, and to me, Oregon hasn't showed. We know about the preseason rankings, returning starters, the whole thing. But is this a case where it's the first-year starting quarterback that might be doing okay, and maybe it might be until that second year where he gets going, if he's still around at that point. But anyway, Oregon 16.5 and 50 at Oregon State. This is the one that jumped out at me. I'm all over the Beavers. You know they're going to be high as a kite against Big Brother. Man, I love was Oklahoma State as good as Oklahoma last year? No. But the last time they had them in Bedlam at home, they played with their hair on fire. And I think that's going to be the case on Saturday in Corvallis. Give me Oregon State plus the 16.5, Paul.
Yeah, and you have to wonder, too. I mean, Oregon is a team whose program and ascension to the top has at least somewhat been built on the broad NIL shoulders of Nike founder Phil Knight. A lot of these guys are getting paid a lot of money to play football at the University of Oregon. Probably drive, I don't know if they drive, but I'm sure they've got something with the car dealerships, probably driving around in nice cars. Used to be when we were in college, a lot of football players hitched rides. They didn't have cars, so maybe a little bit of that hunger. You just wonder about it'll be an interesting study looking back and reflecting on NIL. Do some of the people living higher on the hog and getting more of the perks, the cash money, the nice cars and so forth and so on, do some of those teams lose a little bit of their edge? And maybe that's the case in Oregon, because you look at their roster going into this year, and man, they look ramped up. It looks like they've got every spot filled, and guys who've had a lot of success, but they're really struggling through 2 games. So I have to agree with your approach and where you're coming from, taking Oregon State when they're going to be all in, they're going to be at home, and they're just, boy, you talking about an outcast. The demise of the Pac-12 was so sad to watch, and to see 2 teams, proud football teams, Oregon State and Washington State, just totally get left behind. This is going to mean a lot to them. So they're going to bring everything. They'll be fully invested in Corvallis on Saturday.
Oregon State and Washington State both won and covered easily last week, and both are in their rivalry. A little bit of rivalry week with Oregon State, Washington State, Pitt and West Virginia. You got a nice a few rivalry games this week. Let's go to the SEC, and you're talking about some a new coach at A&M and one that's squarely on the hot seat. Oh, yes, indeed. Sunbelt Billy. Oh, man, I don't know if Nick Saban could take that roster in against that schedule and come up with a winning record. Certainly Sunbelt Billy won't. But can they play a little bit better? Got pushed around in the trenches in the game against Miami. But A&M comes in here 4.5, 46.5 on the road against the Gators. A desperate spot here for Florida.
Yeah, I was reading some of the articles in the Gainesville newspaper and others this morning, and the whispers certainly growing louder in Gainesville without question concerning Billy Napier's future as the Florida Gators head coach. Some are suggesting he might not make it to the end of the season, and there are still a few others suggesting he might not make it until Sunday if he loses Saturday to Texas A&M. So he's firmly on the hot seat. But I look at it this way: as bad as the Gators looked in that season-opening loss at home to Miami of Florida, lost 42-17, totally dominated. They're still 1-1. They still have 10 games remaining in the regular season. It is clearly a daunting schedule, no doubt about it. But now they at least have some enthusiasm swirling around the program with the debut of 5-star quarterback DJ Lagway, who made his collegiate debut last week against FCS Sanford. Was very proficient in that effort. He was starting, first of all, in place of starter Graham Mertz, who set out the game due to a concussion protocol. But all Lagway did in that game against Sanford, and clearly he was going up against an outclassed opponent, but 18 of 25 passing, 456 yards, 3 touchdowns, and he really threw the ball well downfield. He's got a very strong arm, 6 completions of 30 yards or more, so he extended the field. Napier earlier this week said that both Mertz and Lagway will play against Texas A&M. He reasserted his position that Graham Mertz is still his starter. but I got to feel we're going to get a heavier dose of Lagway than Mertz here against the Aggies. This guy's 6'4", 230. He's a special athlete. He just brings a dimension. He didn't do it much against Samford because he didn't have to, but he can run the football, very athletic. So I think we're going to see at least a 50-50 shot of Lagway, if not a little bit more. You look at Texas A&M on the other sideline, under first-year head coach Mike Elko. I know they had illusions of grandeur there in College Station for the first season, but I just don't think they're quite there yet. Still a work in progress. You look at their quarterback, Connor Wigman. Notre Dame's got a great defense. There's no question about it. A quality defense, one of the top 10 defenses probably in college football. But Wigman against Notre Dame in that opener on throws of 5 or more yards, 5 of 16 with 2 interceptions for 61 yards. That's according to ESPN stats and information. So they don't have a downfield passing game. They don't really have a stud running back. They just don't have a whole lot of juice offensively. I think Florida's bringing the kitchen sink. I think Napier's got to know that if it's not this week, he's coaching for his life. You know, to borrow a poker term, you know, you got to go all in here. So I like the Gators plus 4.5 over the Aggies. Also, the Aggies have failed to cover in their last 4 tries as a road favorite dating back to late in the 2021 season.
You know, Lagway, the freshman from Willis, Texas, Paul, yards per attempt and TD to interception ratio. That's what I look at. 18 over 18 yards an attempt and 3 TDs and no interception against air is good. Okay, so I mean that is impressive. And you put those. Yes, they jump up in class. There's no doubt. But I mean, yeah, you better play them. And so that will be interesting to watch. It's a ABC game on nationally in the Swamp, A&M in Florida. All right, getting to another one of our games, and I had the Tulane Greenies last week, and they covered. And man, I really thought they should have won. I think they should have won. Now, they had the offensive pass interference, but they outgained Kansas State by close to 100 yards, just under 100 yards. But they look good. We talked about Summerall coming over from Troy and taking over a handful of his best defenders over, and they just look the part. They can run, they can hit, and they got a good quarterback who beat out Kai Horton, came in there when the starter was hurt against Ole Miss and played well. But this guy beat him out. It's just that simple. He beat him out, and man, I just think Summerall's got. And I know this, that the Tulane support group, the boosters, they're notoriously cheap. Well, they haven't had much to get excited about with their poor tradition, but they gave a little NIL money as well. So this is as good of a Tulane team as I've seen in a while. Oklahoma, man, they were the big winner against Temple, but a lot of turnovers by Temple created short fields, which ran that score up a little bit. And man, I saw UNLV push around Houston. Houston could have beaten Oklahoma in Norman last week. So 13.5, 47.5. I think these rosters are way closer than normal. Yeah, normally, I'd take Oklahoma and lay to 13.5 the last 29 out of 30 years when these two teams meet. But 13.5, 47.5, I'm going to take the green wave, and I really think what I'm happy about is I'm still getting a good number because they lost. Had they won, then it might have caught more of the attention. Now, I know it was a nationally televised game. A lot of handicappers did see it. Some people don't even watch the games when they handicap, but you watched it. Kansas State was fortunate. Kansas State's pretty good. I'll take Tulane plus a 13.5 at Norman.
Yeah, I mean, I really mostly agree with you here, Jimmy. You look at this Oklahoma team, and their 5-star quarterback, Jackson Arnold, the jury, he's only started 3 collegiate games, so it's very early in his career, but the jury is still clearly out on Jackson Arnold. I don't think he's played that well to this point. You look at their third down conversion rate, even with the lopsided victory over Temple, man, their third down conversion rate is really low in those first 2 games. And like you said, this Tulane football team, they're better than I thought certainly before the season, even though they were kind of one of the co-favorites in the American Athletic Conference. Really been impressed with the play of their quarterback, Mensah. It's just it's a little bit better football, quite a bit better football team than I thought, and I think Oklahoma's going to be in for a dogfight. And again, this is one of those situations where Tulane is going to be more motivated to see Oklahoma or the Sooners on that other jersey than Oklahoma will be to see, the green of Tulane on the other jerseys. So motivation is such a key point. And I think Tulane, they fought Kansas State tooth and nail. I think they'll do the same in Norman on Saturday.
Yeah, the conference, the SEC did them no favor with the lopsided schedule that they gave them. They're definitely peaking toward games ahead on the schedule. They don't realize that Tulane was in the SEC back in the 40s, so that's a long time ago. But yeah, in Arnold, halftime, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions against Temple. Okay, but man, 174 yards against Houston. Just kind of, I just kept waiting for him to kind of get going. It never did happen. Well, speaking of the SEC, the Missouri used to be in the Big 8 with Oklahoma. Now in the SEC with Oklahoma, they host Boston College. Missouri 17-53. Is Boston College one of the surprise teams in college football this year? The quarterback is pretty good, and their coaching is. I was impressed how good they looked running the ball. They were balanced. They were efficient. We know that in that game against Florida State last year, that very good Florida State team, the quarterback gave them all they could handle, but man, they beat them so soundly at Tallahassee on Labor Day night. Boston College back at it, catching 17 at Missouri.
I'll tell you, like you and many others, Jimmy, I was exceptionally impressed with Boston College's season opening 28-13 victory at Florida State. And like you indicated, there was nothing flukish about it. They dominated the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. They did Boston College for 263 yards, 5.1 yards per carry, and they only allowed the Seminoles 21 yards rushing, only 1.3 yards per carry. The longest gain by a Seminole running back against Boston College was 8 yards by a running back. Uyangale scrambled for 13 on a different play, but a running back's longest carry for Florida State, 8 yards. So is Boston College that good? Is Florida State that bad? Or is it a combination of the two? Probably the latter. But still, like you, man, Bill O'Brien just came in there. Sometimes it takes coaches a while to transition. They've got different players. But, man, they just came out of the gate, really looked like a football team, and they looked like a physical football team. Looking at Missouri, this is a good football team without question. Finished number 8 in the final AP poll last year after defeating a watered-down Ohio State team in the bowl. But I'm not sure that this year's version of the Tigers is as good as last year's. And it's primarily, I think we've probably talked about it on the podcast, is primarily the fact that they had 5 defensive players selected in this past April's NFL draft. And 3 of those 5 defensive players were selected in the first 3 rounds. So they had a defensive end, Darius Robinson, went in the first round. Cornerback Ennis Rakestraw went in the second round. Linebacker Tyron Hopper went in the third round. So that's a lot of big-time talent out the door. And I know they were really impressive in their first 2 games. Lopsided shutout victories over Buffalo and Murray State. But Buffalo, they're one of the 10 or 15 worst teams in the FBS. Murray State, I love the Racers, but they went 2-9 in the FCS last year. So we really don't know anything about Missouri yet. We know a little bit about Boston College. We've seen what they can be at their best. You mentioned Thomas Castellanos, their quarterback. There were only 3 quarterbacks last year at the FBS level that threw for over 2,000 yards and ran for over 1,000. Thomas Castellanos was one of those. He had the big game last year against Florida State. If he can cut down his turnovers, which he had an issue with last year, he won't only be one of the best quarterbacks in the ACC. He'll be one of the best quarterbacks in college football. I like Boston College. I think the points are a little bit too hefty here. Boston College plus 17 over Missouri in Columbia.
A little bit of poor man's Kyler Murray, almost, as Castellanos. He's kind of shifty, he's jittery, he's elusive. Not real big, but has a decent. I like his game. Well, but Missouri, no problem taking care of the Renowinds, huh? They haven't given up 10 first downs yet. I mean, 5 first downs to Murray State and 9 first downs to Buffalo. They have yet to give up a point. Boston College will score some points in that game. Missouri does have a chance, though, to go 6-0, 7-0 when they go into Tuscaloosa. This is going to be tougher than probably first anticipated. Boston College looks pretty good. Our first impressions of them this year looks like they've taken that next step with that second-year starting quarterback. He looks just that much better. He was dangerous last year. He's dangerous and dependable is what I see this year. But they have a trip to College Station. But they could. Their schedule is favorable. They're one of those Eastern Division teams that just didn't have this big step up as far as the level of their schedule like some others. All right, that's going to do it for me and Paul Stone. Again, twice a week. It's the high profile, the high volume games, and then our best bets. We do it twice a week right here on our Sports Bettor's Paradise. For Paul Stone, I'm Jimmy Ott on the Sports Bettor's Paradise on the Bet Rivers Network.